Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember that the chat room is open, crusadechannel.com/chat. And that's the only social media out there worth actually socializing in. And also, please follow Joe and I and support us wherever you find us on social media. YouTube, the Frontline TV, and on our website, thefrontlinetv.com, thefrontlinetv.com. Joe Resinello, not for anything, in the 20th century, there were some prophetic voices, if you will, all right? Orwell, there's a lot of people out there. And there's a reason why, Joe, we talk about these people, because what they wrote at the time they wrote it might have seemed like, what would you call it, Joe? Wild fantasy of some kind, or
Sure.
some sort of
Sci-fi.
sci-fi nightmarish scenario for human beings. I think that what they were onto is that human beings are capable of some of the most depraved evil there is. And what we're seeing now is exactly that. We're seeing it played out. Orwell's one of them, and several others. One more famous one that, Joe, I know you read when you were at QP, and I read at Seton Hall Prep, A Brave New World. And liberals hate, Joe, by the way. The leftists, they hate when we point out Brave New World, 1984. You know why? Because it's all unfolding before our eyes. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, Joe's alluding to basically an article in Crisis Magazine by Samantha Stevenson. She's basically talking about Huxley's Brave New World. She basically says the Brave New World is here. Just to give you a little taste of what Stevenson opined in the article, she said, the family has been dismantled. Monogamy is reviled. Promiscuity is the norm. Parents are obsolete and the government indoctrinates our children. Reproduction has moved to the laboratory and promiscuity has become the cultural norm. Parents find the realm of their authority shrinking as schools encourage social gender transition for students, not only without parent permission, but intentionally withholding the information for the protection of their own children. This is all on point. And here's the thing, Joe. Why are we okay with it? You see, it's so sad when you see people, they're just so indifferent. I can't even believe the indifference. I can remember, to be honest with you, going to my kid's pediatrician. She has a very successful medical practice in a very nice town. And I'm talking to her, and we were just, obviously she's a smart woman. She's a doctor. And I mean, like, we're having a conversation. And she agreed with a lot of the things like I was saying. And then she's just like, about the public schools. And she's just like, but what are you going to do? It's like, what? How are you okay with that?
Right.
Like, how are you okay with this? Like, you're allowing people to basically manipulate your children and you're fine with it. Like, Joe, for the life of me, now listen, some people have no choice. That woman does have a choice.
That's right.
She's very wealthy. And I just don't understand. And here's another thing. If you don't have a choice, and listen, some people don't. Let's be honest. I mean, it's just the way it is. Not everyone could homeschool. I mean, to be honest with you, and this is reality. I mean, there are people who could barely make it with both people working. They could barely live. And that's reality. I mean, and that's where sometimes like people don't, it lacks charity to even address that.
But Joe, real quick, I'd love for you to address this along the lines of exactly, because there's a lot to talk about here. We don't have enough time in an hour to go through this whole article. But here's the thing. What happens when parents in Virginia, let's say, go after the school board for this nonsense, fighting against this nonsense? So on the one hand, you have an indifference, which I agree with you. We should not be indifferent. If we were less indifferent, by the way, the nonsense that would happen in Virginia would not have happened. But leaving that aside, but also look at the fear that's being perpetrated on people. A guy goes to the school. Now, forget about a lot of this nonsense that Huxley's talking about. A guy goes to the school board and says, You covered up my daughter being raped, and yells at them as you would or I would or any red-blooded American man would do. Now, here's where the fear comes in. That guy's called a domestic terrorist by the guy sitting in the Oval Office. So you and others, don't get me wrong, and others. My point is, on the one hand, you have indifference, in the on the other hand, you have fear. I'd love for you to speak to
But,
that.
but but people are again. Why do we vote for these people, Joe? I mean, I see this week people like on social media complaining about the swimmer at UPenn. Dude, I mean, I hate to say this, and I'm not just saying, and we weren't the only ones. We called that out. We called that out well before this election.
Yep.
And we're not the only people who said that this type of behavior was going to happen. They're actually complaining. And this is the point that listen, if you're not going to do anything, even vote, then don't complain. Because here's the deal. This is happening in front of your face. They censor people. Here's the thing. I don't agree with a lot of people out there. You have a right to say it. You simply do. And they're censoring people. They listen, you don't have to like Donald Trump. That's fine. This is America. You don't have a right to censor him. And I'm sorry. You could disagree with him. You don't have to vote for him. You don't have a right to censor him. And everyone's okay with it. And what they're missing is this: it can happen to you.
Right.
You see, this is where people, these are the smartest quote unquote people. It can happen to you. And here's another thing: it just might. And it might be, Donald Trump just spoke at CPAC. He said, "You have awoken a sleeping giant. You may be surprised what happens in 2024."
But Joe, let me cut you off there. The problem with the giant, okay, is that he's very big. He's probably fat. He's dangerous. Don't get me wrong. And we are the sleeping giant. So I'm not criticizing the giant, so to speak, on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online. The problem is you've awoken him, but it's also 6 o'clock in the morning. The giant's fat. The giant's trying to wake up, and the giant hasn't had his coffee yet. The giant needs to wake up. You know, it's like when I wake up in the morning, Joe, let me tell you something. When I'm on the show with you at the front line with Joe and Joe, I'm full of vim and vigor, as they say. Okay. But in the morning, with my poor wife, it takes time to wake me up. She's got to get me that coffee, and I got to have some coffee, and I got to wake up. But then when I'm up, then watch out. The problem is the giant we're talking about is still in the process of waking up and needs to have that coffee and needs to open his eyes. Okay. You're right. That giant is dangerous, particularly to the left. Who do we represent? Me, you, Mike Church, Rick Barrett, all the people at the Crusade channel, all the good Catholics out there that are fighting the fight in the culture. We are the giant. Many of us are awake, not woke. That's their term. We're awake, and we're waiting for the rest of us to wake up too. The giant has to completely wake up to push these people back on their heels to say, what did we start with, Joe? What we've been saying for a very long time, and what many real conservatives have been saying for a long time. We do not want 1984, alluding to Orwell's novel. We do not want that brave new world that you offer, alluding to Aldous Huxley. We don't want it. We've seen it in action, Joe. I would love for you to comment on this. They make it seem like we haven't seen this in human history. Yet in our lifetimes, we've seen the bad fruit of this brave new world of 1984. We've seen the bad fruit of it. And they say, oh, well, that's not us. We offer something different. You offer the same damn thing. It's hellish, and we don't want it. I'm
But
handing it
look
to
at
you,
the
Joe.
fruit. Let's just look at the fruit of these decisions. Everyone rationalizes them away. Let's look at the driver of this inflation. It's shutting down our oil production. That's one of the main drivers of this inflation. We could be completely autonomous. And here's another thing: I'm all for clean energy. I'm all for it. We're not there from a technology perspective yet. So they're strangling you. And
Right.
yet, I'm going to be honest with you. I do think Biden will lose. Not that the next president's going to be the savior, because he or she is not. Um, but I'll be honest with you. And you said this, Joe, and you're spot on. Biden will get 40 something percent of the vote. How do you listen? This is where I just say to myself, gosh, what does it take? He's killing you.
Joe,
He's killing you.
what
And yet,
underlies Joe Rossinello, listen, the Brave New World doesn't work unless you kill God. The Brave New World that they offer requires the death of God. But what do you get? See, because they don't want to open their eyes and they don't want to see that if, as Nietzsche said, if you kill God, then what must we do? We must make, that means we must be God. We must make ourselves into gods. And then what they do is, Joe, now they'll figure in their minds, they'll find a way. They'll use science. Everything, of course, is science. You know what they do with that? They make themselves healthier, because they feel like they have to live the longest period of time because there is no afterlife. So they have no hope of that. So they need to run around Central Park 50 times. They have to be in shape. What is it? What else is in this article? Designer babies. Even Woody Allen, all right, in I think it was in Annie Hall, even he alluded to it. He was walking through Central Park and he was mulling the his own existence again. I used to be a very big fan of Woody Allen, but he's gone off the deep end. But anyway, he's walking and a woman jogs by him and he's wearing his army jacket, like the curmudgeonly Jewish guy walking along Central Park by the pond. Okay. And the woman, the joggers are going by. And he says, look at them going, just trying to stave off the inevitable. He's right to a degree. And I'm not saying that we're not supposed to be healthy. Don't take me the wrong way. But he has a point and he's trying to comment on something. We're all going to die. And the difference is a lot of people, Joe Rossinello, I think, that buy into a lot of these lies, whether it be from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and what he's pointing out, or George Orwell in 1984, or any dystopian novel, okay, is that they all fear death. They fear death, Joe, because they've killed God, and therefore they have no hope. And even in making themselves God, they realize they can't live forever. They can't, and there's a despair there, Joe, is my point. There's a larger lesson, I think, of despair. Am I wrong?
no, I think so. And I think a lot of the, what's it called? The screaming is projection. They recognize a lot of what we saw, and we've talked about this on other shows, that summer of 2020. They have no place to put their sin. They have no place to put their sin. And they're projecting that on others. I mean, my wife and I were talking about this. We actually got to go out for brunch today. I felt like an adult. It was amazing.
Hmm.
But that's another note. We were talking about like how basically how like wealthy white women are like pointing the finger at like other white people saying that it's racism, as if they're not going to come for you too.
Oh,
Like it's almost like they're like as if they're not going to come for you too. It is just absurd. This has been an embarrassment. These last few years, if you step back from it, like if you were from Mars and you came and just observed the nonsense that has gone on in this country, it is an embarrassment. An embarrassment. I
Joe Rossin,
can't even believe it,
Joe
to be
Rossinello
truthful with you.
on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Joe, let me tell you something. I see it. Now I'm in the hospitality industry, as everybody knows. And now that I'm in Arizona, Joe Rossinello, I see it firsthand. Okay. And the reason why it triggered a thought in my head, what you said, is because a lot of okay, don't get mad out there, all you women. Okay. A lot of these women that want the designer babies, they're all into all of this nonsense that we're going to get into even deeper on the Crusade channel. Okay. They want, they've all voted for Donald Trump. God bless them. That's fine. I got no problem. I probably agree with them on a lot of things, but they don't realize how superficial they are, because what happens is because it's like we always talk about. You mentioned like a lot of women who are very superficial and everything else, and unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with. Is that politically they say one thing, but they don't realize just how blind they are on all these other things. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Well, I don't think they think past their front door. You see, the most people operate in that fashion. They don't think past their front door until it affects them. Recently, we've seen some things, the economy, because to be truthful with you, it's killing people. It affects the price of food. It
Mhm.
affects the price of everything, fuel, and it's killing people. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I drive an economy car and I'm not in debt. I can afford the gas. I also don't drive. Like,
Mhm.
I take the bus to New York. I don't drive. So, like, it really doesn't affect my family. There are so many people, like people who drive vans for a living, like, what, like the type of work that they do, workmen, which it's a gas guzzling vehicle. They're getting killed. They are getting crushed, and
Right.
it's a regressive tax. These are the people who they're saying they're for. You're not for them. Yeah, and Joe, and they vote for them anyway. You see, this
Mhm.
is where I just say to myself, it's like, you left New Jersey. I don't talk New Jersey politics because it's a hopeless cause. The union runs New Jersey. Everyone has a lottery ticket who has a pension. And until the well runs dry, they will continue to vote for Grimace if he is on the ticket. They don't even think past it because they have a lottery ticket in their hand.
But then
Many of
but then aren't they suffering under this brave new world then? And by the
To a
way, my thought
degree,
was
but they're still not willing to give up their lottery ticket because, Joe, I hate to say it, a lot of these people, and they're not skilled workers. They would be working at Aldi's making $13 an hour if it wasn't for their cousin Tommy, who got them a job in the Barrow, whatever, making $70,000 a year and a pension and benefits. They have no qualifications.
right.
And and that is why New Jersey, and there's other states like this. You talk to normal people, like, let's not even get into like some of the social issues, just regular people. They're not for this crap, but they vote for it because they have their lottery ticket in their hand. And that's how people operate. But it
Well,
will
the
go
Joe,
bust.
one thing I was going to say to you, my thought got a little muddled before because, and I apologize for that at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. You said they're coming after you. My larger thought, and then we'll come back into this, was that again, the comfortable lifestyle, the I'll vote for Donald Trump. But remember, Joe, there's a lot of people, and again, we're not Trump bashing here. We voted for him, both you and I both voted for him twice. Okay. And I would vote for him again. There's no question.
Oh, so
But
would I in a
a lot of
minute.
those
I'll
people,
admit it
particularly
right
women,
now. In a minute.
right? A lot of those women are sexually liberated, at least limited, uh, or on some level pro-choice. Let's say, even if it's very limited choice. So they're pro-abortion, pro-contraception, and the whole nine yards. And that's why I was thinking about it because of what you said. Do you think? And they're wealthy, by the way. Do you think they're not coming for you? Just because you buy into all this nonsense, do you think they're not coming for you? They're
Well,
coming
they
for you.
already have. They price people out of New Jersey. You talk to people in terms of like when like to live where we live, you have to work and you have to make a decent buck because the taxes are off the hook. You don't retire and say I'm going to stay in my house here unless you're very well to do. You have to be hustling. Listen, Joe, people, it is sad. It is the saddest thing I've ever seen. I've said this time and time again. It's like watching a drug addict. It's like watching a drug addict. Someone made a comment on social media, a friend of mine from high school. They said, Russia, the only thing that they'll understand is bread lines. My comment was this: that's the only thing we'll understand. We don't want to hear it. We
Right.
simply don't want to hear it because we're not willing to make the changes
Well, Joe, or
until
we're not willing to fight, Joe. And I mean, like when I'm reading this
to a
article, you're at
degree
the
that's
front.
true too. To a
We're not.
degree that's true.
Samantha Stevenson in Crisis Magazine. She's not just talking about the sex, Joe. Okay, she's talking about the whole idea of, let's say, what Huxley would have called the soma. Remember when we were in high school, the soma? All right, that drug that makes you feel good and kind of forget about everything. Forget about the fact that you're a slave. Okay, because that's really what it comes down to. Joe, what about the push for drug legalization in America? And how many conservatives? Remember, we're not criticizing the left here. We already know they're our enemy. We're trying to wake up people who are supposed to be in our own ranks and say, listen, in the name of freedom, you still can't allow these things. What about the push, Joe Resinello, for drug legalization? All right.
Well, it's they look at it
Everybody
as a
wants.
tax base because
No, no, but
again,
aside from that, Joe, I'm talking about the people that are using it. The idea that
oh,
you're
they
you're
don't care
still
about
looking
them,
to
Joe.
you
Do
could
they
think you're
care about them?
conservative all you want. Go ahead, Joe. Go, go,
But
go.
they don't care about them. I mean, Joe, I mean, let's be honest. They don't care about them. They look at it as look at even like the referendums in New Jersey with regard to gambling, like to gamble at the Meadowlands. They don't care that the
Right.
people who go to the Meadowlands, most of which don't have two nickels to rub together.
Their
I mean,
collars are blue, Joe. Their
no,
collars are
but
blue.
absolutely. I mean, like they don't have two nickels to rub together. They'll be broke. They'll piss their whole entire paycheck away.
They'll find $500 to go to the blackjack table.
Oh, but that no, no question. But that's my point. They don't care about these people. People, oh please, Joe. What it has to it I say it time and time again. It's the story of mankind. It happens. It just goes. I mean, look, let's go to the Old Testament. Here it is, Moses. He the the Israeli people, they're in slavery. They're in slavery. He gets them out of it and he marches them out through like unbelievable circumstances. Him and Aaron cut out for a little bit to go pray on a mountain. He comes down, they're worshiping a golden calf.
Yeah, they got it
But that's
because. Go
human
ahead. Go
nature
ahead.
because they can't tough it out. It was a little tough in the desert. They can't tough it out. And that's what it is. People are not willing. Like, I'll use my own example. Like bad behavior in college, figured it out young. And then I didn't behave badly. And I took a long time, but I met a good girl and I got married and I have a good marriage. But I had to, first of all, form myself in that time, but I had to put time in. People are not I'll just use that as an example. They're not willing to put in the time. They're not
Well,
willing to
Joe,
do it. And
well,
then
the,
their
the
life
problem is,
stinks.
but the problem is, you cannot go from slavery to the promised land. It doesn't work
Oh,
that
of
way.
course it doesn't.
You
If
have
you're an
to go
adult,
to
you're right.
the desert so that you can
Joe,
understand
you're
what it is that you
100%
want.
right.
Yeah,
You're
people say, "Well,
100% right.
you guys are preaching. Well, you're damn right I'm preaching, man. Look, because I go through it in my life. You've gone through it in your life, all right? And life is a struggle. Most of our lives we spend in that desert. And what do we do in that desert between slavery and the promised land? Okay, we question God. Okay, we question how long we have to be there. We wonder whether or not we want to return to our slavery or do we want to move forward towards freedom in the promised land. Okay, this is a human impulse, a fallen part of our fallen nature is that we think about these things. But why are we here? Why are other people out there trying to wake people up? We talked about waking the giant, because the one thing is this: I could struggle with myself in that desert because I know I have God. Eventually, God will bring me to that promised land if I have faith. That's not, we want to encourage people, of course, Joe Resinello, to remember that even if you're in that desert for that metaphorical 40 years, okay, if you trust in God, He will bring you out the other side. You will go to the promised land. But the problem is, what we do is we allow people to try to drive us back into Egypt. And we do it by embracing all this nonsense out there, a lot of which Huxley was talking about in his novel, Designer Babies. Oh, you mean I could be sexually liberated, abortion, contraception. We could create human beings in a laboratory. No need to have to carry a baby in your womb and lose your shape. I mean, there's a lot of different things you could talk about there. Joe, it's so easy, and I want to hand it over to you to convince people to turn around in the desert and go back to Egypt. That's the problem. And these are the people we're fighting against, is those who will try to convince those people that they want to go back to slavery. What say you?
Well, like I said, Joe, there's a lack of faith, and there's also they just want quote unquote comfort. They rather eat the fast food. And to be honest with you, I tell my kids this all the time. My father used to say it. There are no shortcuts. This is not heaven. There are no shortcuts. If everyone, to be honest with you, to have a good life, if it was easy, and I'm not talking about wealth, I'm talking about to live a fruitful and good and joyful life. If it was easy, everyone would do it. It's not.
Right.
It's like an iceberg. You only see the top of it. It goes down deep. An iceberg goes deep into the ocean. People are not willing to do the blocking and the tackling in life. And that's what we're seeing in our own society, in our culture. They're taking the shortcuts. And Joe, it shows. They're not fooling anyone. Put whatever you want on your stupid ass Facebook page. Put whatever you want on Twitter.
Joe, you remember when we were kids at the Frontline with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Joe, remember when we were kids, there was that documentary, Scared Straight?
Oh, yeah,
Remember
yeah, yeah.
Scared Straight?
I
They
do.
take these kids and they put
The
them in
raw
jail.
way.
They brought them down to Rawway State Prison. Not a pleasant place, all you kids in New Jersey. So don't commit crimes, whatever you do, because if you go there, you truly are in one of Dante's circles of hell. Okay. But the reason why I bring it up because what you're reminding me that, well, you know what, Joe? In order to wake now, though, that show, just for our audience out there at the Crusade Channel, they took these kids, okay, mostly black kids, but a lot of white kids too. They stuck them in Rawway State Prison for a day. Joe Rossinello, for one day. Makes you think of being in hell for one day, okay? You think you want to go back there after spending a day in Rawway? You think you want to go back there after spending a day in hell? Okay? That's all we're being offered, Joe Rossinello. And that's why I bring up Scared Straight. People need to know the love of God more than anything else. Okay. We understand that. Okay. We will always talk about that. We need to know and acknowledge the love of God, the love that he gives to us. But sometimes, Joe, as Isaiah, I think it was Isaiah, Joe said, and I'll hand it over to you. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that is an important thing. And that's why I bring up Scared Straight. People need some fear, Joe, so that they start thinking. See, your mind sometimes needs a traumatic catalyst to start working. It's like jump starting a car. You have to put the positive and the negative on the battery, and you have to jump the car, and then it starts running. The mind, Joe Rossinello, needs the same thing. We need to jumpstart people's minds. Fear is a good way to do it. And if anything, Huxley and Orwell were talking about this a very long time ago. Don't think this won't happen. If you fear for yourself, if you fear for your family, get it straight. This crap is happening now, Joe. I'll hand it over
Well,
to you.
Joe, there's to fear something means first you have to acknowledge it. We don't think that we're going to be judged. We don't even acknowledge sin. I mean, like we don't as a societies. And here's another thing. If you don't acknowledge sin, you don't acknowledge repentance. And if you don't acknowledge repentance, there is no salvation. Get that through your head.
No.
Get that through your head. Like, but people don't operate on that mode. And frankly, again, it shows. It shows because there are consequences to your behavior.
Right.
And here's another thing, and I want to go to the quote. Stevenson quotes John Paul II, who is an amazing person, not just from a religious perspective, but as far as a thinker who also went through some pretty traumatic times, in the 20th century. This is what he had to say in the midst of the Cold War. He said, "We do not pretend that life is all beauty. We are aware of darkness and sin, of poverty and pain, but we know Jesus has conquered sin and passed through his own pain to the glory of the resurrection." Excuse me. And we live in the light of the Paschal mystery, the mystery of his death and resurrection. We are an Easter people, and Alleluia is our song. We are not looking for a shallow joy, but rather a joy that comes from faith, that grows through unselfish love, that respects the fundamental duty of loving your neighbor, without which it would be unbecoming to speak of joy. We realize that joy is demanding, it demands unselfishness. It demands a readiness to say with Mary, be it done to me according to thy word. That's not the way we operate as our society.
No,
It's
no, we
about
don't.
my word. And here's another thing, and this is again how we operate. If we're powerful, meaning we're smart, or we have some money, or we come from a family of means, or we're physically strong, and I can get away with it, I'm going to. And that's how we operate. We operate that on that premise. It's not about, like, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. But sadly, that is exactly what we do.
Well, the
And
thing is, what we do is we look to, a lot of people on the left say, "Hey, just do it." Like Joe, like the swish on Nike. Just do it, right?
there you
As though
go.
that's I mean, listen, that is a very successful. You can say what you want about Nike. That's a very successful, what do you call it, slogan?
Oh my
Um,
lord. Arguably
just
one of the
do it.
most successful ever.
Yeah, but if you turned around to some people who say just do it, and Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey, both of whom were Satanists, okay, they actually said that their commandment that they challenged Christ's commandment with was do what thou wilt. Do what thou wilt. That's the same as just do it. It's the same thing, Joe. These are the messages that are coming out there from the devil through secondary, through secondary causes like, corporations and governments and things like that. But that's the mentality that we have. Just do it. When you look at this article that we're talking about at the Frontline with Joe and Joe in the Crusade Channel, we're talking about Samantha Stevens' argument or article in Crisis Magazine. Joe, what is she talking about? They sold us sexual promiscuity. Just do it. They sold us drug legalization. Just do it. But why don't people realize, Joe, and why does it take a couple of jamokes like us and many other people out there, including and most importantly, the Catholic Church, to explain to people, listen, Christ didn't come to save you from the Romans. Christ didn't come to save you from persecution from the world. He came to save you from sin and liberate you from sin, which means real freedom. Why is it that you keep looking towards these things that you believe make you free, but in the meantime make you slaves?
Because it's
Because
easy.
people want it, because it's easy. I was going to say, because it's easy.
It's
Because
easy.
it's easier to put a couple of drops on your Joe. Back in the day, remember you had, again, we don't hide the fact that we weren't the best guys when we were kids, teenagers. You had to go buy a dime bag in the park. Okay, you had to almost risk your health. You could get killed doing that.
Oh,
Okay,
without a doubt.
all right. You go in Newark or down here,
Passaic.
North Arlington, or Passaic, any places, Patterson. You go try to buy a dime bag, you could get killed. Okay, now you could go down the block and there's not seeds in the thing, and you have to sit there for a half hour before you roll the joint and smoke it. Now it comes in a little bottle that the state says is A-OK, and you put the drops on your tongue. Is Huxley not right? Why, Joe? Because people think they're free to do that, number
Well, Joe,
one,
they're
and
just
because they're trying to
self-medicating.
escape the pain, they're trying to escape
That's right.
the drudgery of life, the
That's
pain of
right.
life. Okay, and you're not going to, because even if you do that, Joe, and I'm going to hand it over to you. If you think that doing these things is going to lead to freedom, go ask those people whose lives have been destroyed by sexual liberation, by drug use, and all of it. That the state, and Huxley would say this in the Brave New World. That's what they offer you as being liberated.
What it is, I saw it was like a short little film. It's I can't recall his name. If you said it, he's a fairly prominent Protestant preacher, and he put out a film. It was short, and it was about like a guy in his apartment, and he referred to frogs. And in the apartment, he was trying to make a point, and it was actually I'll never forget it because it was a good point. And in the apartment, there are frogs everywhere, like in his coffee, hopping around his bed. He's making food. It's popping in the food. They're everywhere. They're infested. His apartment, that's a good way to put it, infested with frogs. And then at the end, he said, imagine life without the frogs. And basically, the point he was trying to make was People have just gotten used to the frogs. That's life. And you hear people, they'll say that, like, like SHIT happens. This is the way it is. Oh, it's a rite of passage. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's not. But they accept this secondary, like, way to live. They just accept it. They compromise in terms of the people that they marry. They compromise themselves, how they behave and how they act for money, and it sucks all the joy out of them. It sucks the joy out of them. And
Right.
it is the saddest thing to see, because, to be honest with you, again, to have a good life, many times they're not going to put you on the cover of People magazine. It doesn't look good. Some of the happiest people are the simplest of people. They live good and dignified lives, and they die with dignity. Now, there is no death with dignity. They set you on fire, and then they sprinkle your ashes on the third green, on the third friggin' like hole in
Right.
a golf
Right.
course.
Right.
I see that sometimes, and I'm just like, holy crap. I had relatives that could barely speak English, and they had enough sense. And they basically looked at the body with respect and dignity, and they buried the body, and they visited the body. People would pray at the grave. These people had no education.
Right.
This is our society.
Joe,
We're so progressive. We figured everything out. We live like savages.
well, no, no, well, that's the thing. And let me tell you something. We would find political common cause with some of these people, you and I. They would probably identify as conservative slash libertarian. Okay. Listen, again, we could bash the left all day long. They're in another reality. Our goal is to wake up the giant on this side and say, stop, man. Stop, woman. Stop. It's not all about getting laid. Okay. It's not all about getting drunk. It's not all, life doesn't come down to that. You want real freedom, you got to rein it in a little bit. Joe Rissanello, I'm going to tell you a quick story. And to all the people out there at the Crusade Channel, I'm in the restaurant industry. People know that. Joe, recently while I was working, okay, a guy evidently got a piece of meat caught in his esophagus, okay? And he passed out by the bar in the place that I work, okay? He passed out. And people backed away. They backed away from the bar. The bartender, who's knowledgeable about health issues like CPR, things like that, came over to try to help the guy. Another patron came over to try to help the guy. And I'm telling you this story, Joe Rissanello, for a reason, because I think you're going to be, I was going to say you might be shocked. I don't think you're going to be shocked based on what you just said, okay? The guy who's laying on the floor, potentially, he didn't die. He didn't die, okay? Potentially, though, about to die, because we didn't know at that point. His feet are touching the stool, the bar stool, of a guy who's eating a steak at the bar. He's eating a ribeye. Everybody backs away from this guy who's passed out and trying to give the bartender and this other guy some room till the EMTs come. And this guy continues to eat his steak. That's the state of the modern world. That I had to go over and tell this guy, sir, do me a favor, leave the steak, we'll buy you a new one, but you got to back away from the bar. That's the world we live in. This guy didn't even, I don't know if he realized it, didn't realize it, too stupid, not caring. Joe Rissanello, maybe you can help me out with this. The indifference that this guy showed to the life of another human being that was dying literally at his feet, to me, is symptomatic of everything we're talking about in this
Joe,
conversation.
that is a perfect example of what's going on in our culture. Our culture and our country is dying at our feet. It may be dead, actually. Because I'm going to tell you this, the benefit that we had is when we made the wrong turn, we had in the rear view mirror parents that at least had their feet on the ground, and they built a house that there was some semblance of stability. There was some idea of God. And believe me, my parents weren't holy rollers, but they did go to church. There was stability, and I was loved. This generation doesn't even have that. I'm telling you this right now. What's awaiting these young children I fear for them in terms of finding a good spouse, in terms of the wreckage that they think is somehow going to produce a positive and stable society. The ideas that are being explored will absolutely positively fail. I'll be dead, but I will tell you that right now, none of which you could build a society upon. They don't have that image in the rearview mirror, because I'm going to tell you this, it's going to be real rare that you'll see people married 40 years, 50 years, because I got news for you. The only thing that makes you to get to that point is God. Talk to anybody who's been married 40 years, 50 years, and I got news for you. If they don't have God in their marriage, they're miserable. It's
Joe
an endurance
Rossinello.
contest.
But the thing is, but as I said earlier at the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Joe, but you got to remember something. Again, Nietzsche died in the 19th century. His ideas live on. Okay. These are people, Joe Rossinello, when you kill God, when you kill objective morality, when you have a transvaluation of values, okay? Well, you have to replace that with something, Joe. You think the people who make themselves God don't replace that with something? In other words, so they now have become gods. People become gods of their own life, and the problem is because these are false gods. You are a false god if you think you're a god, and you think that all these things are going to make you happy. Joe, this is what Lee. Somebody commented about people on the side of the road. Okay, homeless people on the side of the road. Now we are supposed to care for homeless people, but how many people are in a figurative homeless on the side of the road because they've destroyed their lives, whether it be by listening to all this nonsense, by not listening to the Catholic Church when it said don't contracept, when the world still says contracept. The church still teaches contraception. Artificial contraception is an intrinsic evil. How about we start with that? Let
Yeah, but you
alone
know, the
drug
thing is,
use,
you're
abortion,
100% right, Joe.
homosexuality, and all of it. Why is it that we all now look, we're all going to be at some point or another the prodigal son? Very few people are not the prodigal son or the prodigal daughter that go out, find themselves in a dark place. They feed the pigs, and then they realize, that's God's way of saying, you want to come back home now? You want to come? My home is open. You want to come back home? Yeah, I had to let you go out there and suffer. But Joe, how many people who are the prodigal son or daughter, by an act of their own will, say, I'm going to stay in the dark place? The prodigal son came home. He was feeding the pigs. Some people, Joe, are feeding the pigs and they're totally happy with it. And that's sad.
Well, that's very true. You always have people like that. I guess like what can make people turn around, some people, is to basically live your life in a positive way. And then people will, as time goes on, they'll say, well, listen, why can't I have that? But here's the thing: there's no such thing as cheap grace. All those things require discipline. They require grace. They require you to bend your knee. They require you to not say, thy will be done, my will be done, but thy will be done. And listen, Joe, it began from the garden until now. It's just not the way it works. I mean, again, my wife and I were talking about this today at brunch. If Jesus came back, say he comes back tomorrow, and the fullness of what he said and taught is completely revealed. And he said this very clearly: everything in darkness will be brought to the light. This is the words of Christ, not mine. Say tomorrow, Jesus Christ comes back, and that is completely clear to everyone, the good and the bad alike. Do you know the fear that would go through this world?
Mm.
Do you know? I mean, the wickedness that goes on in this world. Because again, it's the strong will survive. If I can get away with it, I'm going to do it. And frankly, there is no judgment. There is no, like, at the end of the day, I got to stand before God and all my sins will. People don't operate under that premise.
No, not at all.
And this is, again, that's why we're adrift. And that's why there is no political messiah. You know, listen, there
Joe, do you
is
see
no,
the cartwheels? Do you see the cartwheels that people are doing when Trump speaks at CPAC and everything else? And quite frankly, if he runs in 2024, I'm going to vote for him. There's no,
of course
I'll,
I will
I'll
vote
say
for
that
him
right.
over
That,
these fools.
or
I
at least
mean,
I agree with
gosh.
him. Right. And they are fools. And remember, Joe, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. And that's really what we're dealing with. Remember, Joe, about scripture. I always think about this. Why do a lot of people hate scripture? Because scripture, to break it down to some brass tacks, in scripture, Joe, there's good guys and there's bad guys. Okay. And obviously, when we talk about scripture, when we talk about the Old Testament and the New Testament, we want to identify with the good guys. Joe, you want to be Peter. You want to be Thomas.
Sure.
Okay. You want to be John. You want to be one of these good guys in the Old Testament. You want to be Elijah, all right? Or you want to be Joseph. Okay. The problem is the Bible's full of bad guys because that's the truth of human history. From the dawn of history till the last day, there are people who choose the good. And we know the good, the true, and the beautiful is Jesus Christ himself. Okay. And there are people that choose evil. But then in the middle of all that, there are people who are deceived. Remember, Jesus, how many times, Joe, in the New Testament, Jesus said, be not deceived. He didn't say, I'm gonna let it slide if you're deceived. That was a warning to be not deceived. It's not an excuse if you're deceived. It's not an excuse if you buy into all this dystopian nonsense, whether it's Orwell's vision of the future or Huxley's vision of the future. Drugs don't save you, okay? They're not going to get you through this life, okay? Sex will not save you and get you through this life. And all the pleasure you think you're having, you want to know what you're going to end up as? And listen, there's many people out there, Joe. You see them on social media. Michael Jones points this out too. All right. There's many people out there that when you put these things up, when you talk about buying into the slavery that is sexual promiscuity, drug legalization, all of these things that we're talking about in the brave new world, it leads to your own destruction.
Oh, there's
It
no question.
leads
I
to
mean,
your
because we're
own
at that
destruction.
age, Joe, that we've seen it, like the whole arc of that with people that we even know. I mean, like God gives you time as a young person, that arc. But when you start getting into your 40s, you start seeing the bad fruit from bad choices. And the thing is, just turn around. Like it's, Joe, it's the saddest thing to watch. It really is. I be honest with you. I just don't understand it. It's just sad. Like watching this country, the last 13 months was just one this has been a pathetic show, all of which was predictable. All of which was predictable.
But Joe, people have to be, as we say, Mary Kelly, by the way, thank you so much from the
Yeah,
bottom
thank
of
you.
our
That was
heart.
very
Thank
nice
you
of you.
so much, contribution, Mary Kelly. Thank you so much. And we thank you for supporting us at the front line with Joe and Joe. And then as we always say, we are on the Crusade channel, crusadechannel.com. And you go there, kick the tires, and listen to Mike Church and Barrett and the rest of them. And you definitely would want to become a subscriber there. Thank you so much, Mary. God bless you. But Joe, I mean, it really, I don't. I do understand because I have read, unfortunately, I haven't read the Old Testament yet. I need to get to it. I need to sit down and read it. But I have read the New Testament several times. Joe, I get it. Some people out there might say, wow, you guys, Joe and Joe, you're so judgmental. No, we're not. No, we're not. We've been there. Joe, I was 36 years old on my mother's couch. I mean, that's like feeding the pigs. Let's face it. Thank God I had a good mother, all right, who didn't kick my butt out onto the street. But when you're living on your mother's couch at 36 years old and don't even have a driver's license, okay, that's feeding the pigs. And then you have to turn around. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you got to turn around. And let me tell you, sometimes that turnaround, Joe, takes the rest of your life. But if you continue to look to Christ, all these other things that we talk about, all the politics, Joe Ressino, all the culture, that all falls into line. You have a better culture. You have a better government. You have a government, you have a culture of life instead of a culture of death. You have a culture of family rather than the culture of I don't know what. People, Joe, individual. You can't even call it individualism anymore. I don't know how, because that wouldn't be the proper identity for somebody to call. You know what I mean? It's insanity. It's chaos. If we would just wake up, as you said earlier, and the giant have their the giant needs to drink its coffee and wake up, we could forestall a lot of these things. Joe, we could crush with God's grace a lot of these things that are going on out there.
There's no question. I mean, and getting back, I mean, to the theme of the show, I mean, it is like sci-fi. Like, I can't believe what is accepted now. And that's not being a prude, and that's not being just a Catholic. Again, it's stepping back and just saying, wow. I mean, I could just use my own environment, and you could talk to anyone from New York City. New York City, in a matter of 3 years, it was one of the safest places in America.
Yep.
New York City is completely changed. They destroyed it. De Blasio destroyed New York
Joe,
City. And
Joe
that's
Arsenault,
not coming from a Republican. That's just someone who has eyeballs.
Joe, who do you blame for that? You blame the people of New York City.
And then they voted for the
Yep.
same bullcrap.
Yep.
And this is where, again, you just say to yourself, wow.
Right.
Wow. And this is not coming from basically a stuffy this is just someone who is walking down the street.
Joe Arsenault, you're surveying the landscape. And the landscape is rough, brother, but the landscape didn't get there on its own. It was created. And Joe, the reason why, and again, that's why we have to wake up and not buy into a lot of this nonsense. None of this Brave New World, let's call it what it is, BS. Okay? Designer babies. Do you imagine, Joe, the wife up in Westchester? Okay, I know I'm being very critical and judgmental right now. And she sits there talking to her girlfriends. She went to the doctor and they're sipping their lattes. And they're talking about, I went to the doctor. My son is going to be born in 9 months. And we did a designer baby, blonde hair, blue eye. He's going to be muscular. He's going to play he's going to play on the soccer team. You don't see this conversation
Oh,
happening.
that's a fact. And people would pay big money for that.
Huge money.
I
Joe,
mean,
they already paid huge money for in vitro. And in vitro was an abysmal failure. They already paid 20 and 30 and 40 grand for in vitro. So we know they're going to do this.
Oh, that's just a fact. And that is, if you're going to tell some of these parents of means, I can guarantee you that your son will be 6'3", 240 pounds, bench press 400 pounds, and get a 1,500 on his SAT. Do you know how much money that people would pay for that?
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Millions, Joe.
Probably.
If you had $5 million, you would give two to have two children for that. There's no doubt in my mind.
No
Two
question about it.
in a minute. And
Right.
that is this is because, again, we do not operate under the premise that one day we will stand before God and we will have an exit interview. And this is why we are just a boat on the water and anything goes. And you know something, like I said, we have power in one corner. It's going to shift. And you're not going to like it when it shifts. It's going to shift. It's not if, it's when. It's when.
When it
And
shifts against you, then the only, I'm not the biggest Billy Joel fan, but I will say this. I used to be, but after listening to Only the Good Die Young once too often, I kind of like stopped listening to Billy Joel because it's an anti-Catholic song. But he did have a good line in the song Big Shot. You remember, Joe? The line he says, go on and cry in your coffee, but don't come bitching to me. That's my attitude. Now, we as Catholic men have to show mercy, and we would. I would. I know you would. Okay? But in my heart, I say, go and cry in your coffee or your scotch or your vodka or whatever it is you want to cry in. But don't come bitching to me. Don't come bitching to the church. If you're coming to the church, you come on your knees and in the confessional. Because the church for 2,000 years is the one who told you, don't buy into this crap. And Joe, in America right now, we're buying into this crap. Joe, we only have 2 minutes. I'm going to give you the final word.
Listen, the church is for sinners. I mean, ultimately, the idea is to come home. I mean, and if you are in the pigsty, you should sincerely think about getting out of it. I mean, and to be truthful with you, you know it as well as everyone else that you're in it. And this country, and I mean, not just the proverbial pigsty, our country, the culture is in the pigsty.
Joe, a
We've
pigsty is clean compared to what our culture is.
we've bought the lie. We have bought the lie, and frankly, we're bearing the bad fruit. We see it all over the place. Suicides are up.
Oh,
Drug use is up.
yep.
I mean, marriages are failing. Guys, it doesn't work.
Not
I'm
working.
I'm sorry, and here's the thing, don't think that you somehow will skirt it. You're not
Right.
going to.
Yeah, and guess another
You're
thing too, Joe. Capitalism won't save you.
nothing
Capital
will.
Nothing will save you
Nothing,
except
none of it.
Jesus
It
Christ.
doesn't work. It
Right.
doesn't work. And, it's like banging your head against the wall. We're banging our head against the wall. And we do it politically too. But, okay, listen, have it your way. That's another thing. God doesn't force anything upon you, but I got news for you. Our way doesn't work. And
No.
until we come to that point, like I said, we haven't hit that pain point yet. It's going to get to that point, and when it does, I got news for you. It's not going to be pretty for anyone. It's going to
No.
be on everyone. And then maybe some people will figure it out. But I'll be truthful with you. I can't believe, Joe. I seriously can't believe where we've come in just my own lifetime.
Mhm.
And to be honest with you, I actually think it's going to get worse.
No, it's definitely gonna get worse, Joe Rossinello. There's no question about it. And again, if feeding the pigs isn't bad enough and we need to have it get worse, then let it look, bring on the pain then. We have hope. It's not a fairy tale. It's a real hope. It's a theological virtue of hope. And we'll come through on the other end. And if I don't, I just want to go to heaven. And I want to bring my family and as many people as I can with me. The article is Huxley's Brave New World is here. Samantha Stevenson in Crisis. I'm just going to finish this off very quickly. The state of our world is not something to bemoan or escape from. I think that's what we're talking about, Joe Rossinello. It is the ground on which our own fiat takes form. The Almighty Creator of the universe has chosen and called each of us to serve Him in these particular circumstances. The world we live in is begging for our prophetic response. If there was ever a time to rise up and proclaim Christ the King, this is it.
Well,
Joe, I think she
I just
sums it
wanted
up
to
pretty well.
uh, you know, from a scriptural perspective, Zacchaeus climbed the tree to see Christ. He was a sinner, a tax collector, inferring that he stole from people. But he came down. Christ called him and he came down. Many people are up in the tree looking in on many people who have good lives because they've made good choices. You got to come down. You have to make the choice and you have to basically look to take the steps. Lent is coming. It's the time to repent. What does that mean? Go to confession. Go to confession. What are you afraid of? All the tough guys. What are you afraid of? Go to confession. You may be surprised at how you walk out of the box. Change begins there.
Joe Rossinello, that's a great place to end it. Thank you all for listening to us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember, the chat room stays open. Okay, it's the only social media out there worth actually socializing in at crusadechannel.com/chat. Two things. Go to crusadechannel.com, kick the tires, listen, Mike Church, Rick Barrett, Frontline with Joe and Joe, and the whole lineup. We're convinced you'll want to become a subscriber. And then to follow Joe and I on social media, the Frontline TV on YouTube, the Frontline TV on YouTube, and the frontlinetv.com, the frontlinetv.com if you want to support us financially. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.